to Levels Baptist Church Sunday night Bible study. We are looking at the book of Jonah. We're in chapter 1. We've made it up through the first 8 verses and we're ready to start in verse number 9. So we'll just pick up there and start by reading Jonah chapter 1, verse number 9. And he said unto them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which hath made the sea and the dry land. Word for word translation from Hebrew to English, that very first part there. I've got verse 9 broken down into 3 or 4 parts. The very first section, so he said to them, I'm a Hebrew. That it's actually would be, and said to them, Hebrew I. Very similar to the English. But here's the point. This is a very important statement. By using the term Hebrew specifically, he is making a distinction. This was the way the word foreigners would use in reference to the people of Israel. This was the word used by the people of Israel, Israelites, Jews. They called themselves Hebrews, specifically when they were talking to non-Israelites, non-Jews. And then most oftentimes in conversation, when anybody was talking about someone that was not an Israelite, an Israeli, a Jew, a Hebrew, and they were comparing them to someone that was a Hebrew, they would specifically use that term Hebrew rather than Israelite or Jew or any other. So this was a distinction to use this specific word, Hebrew. Well, yes, it's true, that's the official designation of the people of God, and they descended from Abraham. The term Hebrew is actually quite rare in the Old Testament. It was first used in Genesis 14, verse 13, and this was to describe Abram. This was before he was renamed Abraham. In total, it's only used 34 times, 14 of those times in Exodus, 8 times in 1 Samuel. This use of that term Hebrew, this verse using that term Hebrew, is actually the last time that it is used in all of the Old Testament. The word is derived from the name Eber, E-B-E-R. This is someone that descended from Noah's son Shem, an ancestor of Abraham, and his name essentially means yonder side, or when used as a verb, to pass or cross. And so the common understanding of this, the meaning of the word Hebrew, is someone or he who crossed over. Isn't that interesting? Eber was alive at the time of the division of languages, and he was then certainly the father of the family line that maintained the original language of the earth, which we today call Hebrew. Well, Eber, again, means he who crossed over. It's recorded that his descendants lived in Ur, which is on the opposite side of the Euphrates from Babylon. It's probable that he and several generations of his descendants moved away from Babylon to Ur, This was at some point after the time of the Tower of Babel. Abraham was first known as a Hebrew, again, one who crossed over. Well, in his case, he crossed over the Euphrates to leave the area of Babel. It is likely that Eber, his descendant, was with him because Abraham was born 179 years before Eber died. So this group of people with this special language, the Hebrew language, crossed over the Euphrates as directed by God's divine hand as they headed west. So this title, Hebrew, coming from the name Eber, points to a celebration of passing over the great waters of the world. They passed over the Euphrates, we've already said. They passed through the Red Sea. They passed over the Jordan and into the land of promise. The name and title are directly connected with both a physical and a spiritual crossing over. Here now, in the case of Jonah, here's what's interesting. In the case of Jonah, he had actually forsaken the spiritual aspect of the name, but yet was holding on to the physical. If he thought he could remain a Hebrew while running from the Lord, while passing over a great body of water, I'm quite sure he was mistaken. In the New Testament, Paul said that being a Hebrew was a point on which he could boast if by the standards of the world, we can just turn and look at a couple verses real quick in Philippians chapter 3, we'll look at verses 4 through 6. Philippians 3, 4, 5, and 6. Though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh that he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. However, Paul does go on in that same passage to say that in the end, genealogy, whatever group or tribe or clan, whatever even position, even the obedience to the law, all of those things fall short when compared to the greatness of Jesus Christ. So what is it that really actually matters? Not culture, race, creed, status, or wealth. In the end, what matters is the Lord and having a relationship with Him. So Jonah, he wanted the title. Who are you? Where are you from? What people group? What is your identifier? He wanted the title of Hebrew, but at the very same time, he's literally running away from the relationship that name required. This was so much the case that his next words actually bring about a contradiction. Some would use the word oxymoron. So again, we're in chapter 9, but we're moving on from that first part to the next part. He says, and he said unto them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord. Who? The God of heaven. We're going to stop there for now. Very interesting. Fear the God of the heavens. All right, so I've got a quote here from some scholars, some people, a group, 3 men that put together some writings here on this particular verse. And here it is, quote, his practice belied his profession aggravated his guilt. However, the guilt of his own conscience has now redirected him. I'm kind of imagining in my mind a situation where even as Jonah speaks the words, his own ears, hearing those words come out of his mouth, cause him to analyze the words that he just spoke. So he's literally thinking about them as he hears those words come out of his mouth. So he's saying, I am a Hebrew. And the moment that he says that, the moment that he hears that, I think is a very good chance that's the moment that he changes his mind about running away from God and the command that God has given that he go to deliver the message of God to the Ninevites. So here we have a storm raging, and it's almost as if the storm is acting. We know the storm is acting on God's behalf. God hurled the storm, but almost as if the storm has been given a position or a place in the story, like it's given another role. Like it's not just a storm. It's not just blowing hard wind. It's not just bringing rain and big waves. And like it is almost as if it has a voice, almost as if it's talking to Jonah and convincing Jonah that he needs to turn around, that he's going the wrong way. So he says, I'm a Hebrew. And again, I'm convinced that the moment that word leaves his mouth, he hears himself say it, it dawns on him. Remember, this is chaos. There's people that want answers. They're upset. They threw the dice or the lot. It pointed to him, and these guys are upset. They're scared. They've been throwing stuff overboard. They want this storm to stop. They want the waves crashing to stop. And at this particular moment in time, it's interesting that they're treating him so well just simply by taking time to do this interview and ask him these questions. But they're excited. They're upset about the way things are going. And in this moment, it's as if, as that word Hebrew come out of his mouth, as he heard himself say it, as if that's what really, the combination of that and the level of excitement and the storm, almost as if it had a voice of its own, all in that moment, all of a sudden, bang, he really is awakened to what's really going on. And what does he do? How does he follow up the word Hebrew? What comes next? That's what we just read. Jonah 1:9, as he said unto them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven. So who is this? Jehovah, the God of the heavens. Well, if you remember, we talked about the idea that each of these sailors probably had their own gods. Some of them may have been similar to some of the other ones, and their gods, most of them had the understanding that their God was a particular God for a particular situation. And so they had a favorite God that maybe they felt like they had a relationship with, or maybe they felt like they had a track record with him, or a particular God that they felt like had served their interests and brought them through some various times. But they also had the understanding that there was a greater God, greater than their God, that they had a relationship with. And so, and really every port kind of had their own gods, these localized deities, these people, these sailors would encounter all these different local or deities or gods in all of the various places that they would travel and go to. But I do believe they understood that there was some greater, higher God. And I think in this moment, this was not just the awakening of Jonah to the realization of exactly where they're at, but I think this was also a moment in their minds for them to grasp the idea of this God that Jonah is talking about here. Even in a moment that he's running even in a moment of weakness, that he's gone the other way out of rebelliousness, he still is able to give testimony of the one true living God. And I think it had an effect on these sailors. Amazing. So, they recognize, Jonah says, the God of the heavens. I do believe that they recognized that there was a God bigger than their God, and I do believe they had a certain level of fear towards this greater God. Jonah, he's fully awake. He's fully grasping the surrounding, the environment of everything that's going on. And he's finally at the point where he's, okay, I'm done with that running away. I'm done with that rebelliousness. I'm going to tell these people who God is. There's one God, and it's the God that Jonah serves and the God that you and I serve. I pray that you do as a saved, born-again believer. So you had the storm. It almost had a role as if it had a voice to speak into the mind and heart of Jonah, just like the sailors and the captain and everybody else. Just like the casting of the lots. Had all these things step by step, building, but they're all working together to get through to Jonah, to get him to turn around in his mind. So you've got the storm, and it's speaking really very loudly, and it's got everybody's attention. And again, even to the point that the guys, they're searching for answers. They tried some things with their own power, their own might. They threw the lots. They fell on Jonah, and now they understand there's a call to repentance. Jonah, it's time to step up. It's serious. All this stuff is going on. They're upset. They're excited. They feel like their lives are on the line. And his heart, I just feel like in this very moment, as he says Hebrew, as it comes out of his mouth, there is a turning. And I believe at that moment, from that moment forward, he willingly responds. He makes up his mind. He determines, okay, that part of my life is over. The running, the rebelliousness, I believe it was in that moment. Going forward, there's a complete and total change of his conduct. And it's this relationship. It is this turning away from rebelliousness that brings him through this great ordeal, and it allows him to go on to be obedient and carry out the job, the duties. I was trying to make one word. Anyway, he's finally ready, willing, and able to go forward with the command of God to carry the message of repentance to the Ninevites. So he moves out of that camp, out of that mode of being disobedient, and which is a picture of Israel, because their legacy, sadly, is disobedience, always searching for some other God, always disobeying God in many ways. Now, in this reversal, in this moment, this turning back to God, you have a picture of Christ. Christ being obedient. All right, still in verse 9. We're still describing God. So he said unto them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven. Moving on from there, which hath made the sea and the dry land. So I just really feel that something really happened in this moment. The seriousness of the moment, the crying of the sailors, the crying of the storm, the waves crashing and beating on the ship, the casting of the lots, pointing or falling on him. Everything is just so tense and exciting, and all the drama, and it leads up to the moment where and again, it's amazing how kind they are to him to take time to do this interview, to ask him the questions that they ask him. And his answer is, I'm a Hebrew, and I really believe in that moment that he literally heard the word come out of his mouth, and I believe in that moment he was reminded of what a Hebrew is. And it changed in him his attitude immediately in that moment from being disobedient, rebellious, running from God, to changing of his mind, repenting, honestly, to the idea that I'm going to be obedient. And he, again, in the moment, the reason he's there is because he's been rebellious and disobedient, and yet he's still giving testimony to who God is. His God, the God of the Hebrews, the one true living God, the one that, what? What does he say there? He's the God of the heavens, and even beyond that, he's the God that made the sea and the dry land. So, this God, he's the one that made everything, the heavens and the sea and the dry land. He's the creator of all things. There was a day and a time that this stuff didn't exist. There wasn't a sky. There wasn't a sea. There wasn't dry ground. And then all of a sudden God spoke. And in that moment these things came into existence. Creator God. I mean, we live in a world that consists of sky, earth, and sea. And if those things don't exist, then the world doesn't exist. God spoke and these things came into existence. So now, through wisdom, through power, through the work of God in his life, and again, I think it was even his own mouth, his own words, even the speaking of the word Hebrew and knowing as a Hebrew what that meant. I think it reminded him not just who he was, but who God is. Jehovah, the creator of all things. Not just the creator, but even the force behind these things, the sustainer, the one that keeps this stuff going. An all-encompassing, an exclusive claim. This would most definitely be a testimony. And what a time to give a testimony. These guys, I guess it's perfect because they're so scared and they're so worried and they're looking for an answer. So I believe that Jonah is fully awake at this moment in time, fully aware because of all of the surroundings. And I really believe that it's in this moment where he changes from being disobedient. His attitude is, I'm going to reverse. I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to stop with this rebelliousness. And I do believe he's giving testimony. He is telling these men who the one true living God is. All right, we can move on to verse 10. I don't know how far we'll get into it. It's already been 23 minutes by my clock here. It says, verse 10, chapter 1, Jonah 1:10. Then were the men exceedingly afraid, and said unto him, Why hast thou done this? For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. So the first part of that verse, just the part where it says they were exceedingly afraid, they were scared even more now after hearing this answer from Jonah. They were already afraid. They were already running around like their hair was on fire. And again, there's a moment where Jonah makes up his mind. They're afraid, they're upset, they're worried, they need an answer, and I'm going to tell them what the answer is. It's God, the one true living God, the one God of the heavens, the one God that created the land and the sea. There's an amazing thing that happens in a moment when you're excited, when you're upset, when things are at their lowest low. It's amazing how open we are to receiving the truth of who God is. There's an astounding understanding that that's the perfect moment to listen to God and His Word. So maybe if you're not in torment or trial, nothing going on in your life, no storms, things are going well, maybe you're thinking, you know what, I don't need to read my Bible today. I don't need to read it every day. But when things start getting mixed up and there's a big storm and the waves are crashing against the side of the ship, all of a sudden, maybe I need to get down on my knees and pray. Maybe I need to open up this Bible and start reading. And these sailors, Jonah has a captive audience. They are ready to listen, right? They have seen the truth of his testimony. They are living it in that very moment. There's violence. There's a raging storm. It is beating up the ship, the waves, the wind. And it was hurled by God at them at that ship. And when they had the opportunity to use those lots to find out, is this our fault? They believed that those dice, I'm just going to call them dice, they believed that they'd get an answer from them and that they would reveal whose fault all of this trouble was. And the lots fell on Jonah. And so they were convinced that that was true. The dice fell on Jonah. He is the target now. And he's going to be able to confirm. We got to find him and we got to get him talking because he's got the answer. He's going to get us out of this situation. Look in Isaiah 28. Just one verse here real quick. Isaiah 28:19. It says, "From the time that it goeth forth, it shall take you. For morning by morning shall it pass over, by day and by night, and it shall be a vexation only to understand the report." So it's amazing how this moment where they're upset, they're excited, they're scared for their lives, and all of a sudden their minds are open to the message of this testimony that Jonah gives them. So we like to think about this story of Jonah as being about Jonah, and he's being rebellious and he's being disobedient and he's running away. But I'm pretty sure that he's preaching a message, even just in that one verse 9. I'm a Hebrew. The one true living God is my God, and He is the God of the heavens. And He is the creator of all the earth, seas, oceans, dry land. He's preaching a message to these sailors. And I believe in this moment, with everything that's going on, their ears are wide opening. They are listening very intently. The Lord is God. He is sovereign. If He wants to do something, He's going to do it. Nothing can stop Him. Again, man, remember all the effort they had put into trying to fight this storm, to hold it off, to maintain the safety of their lives in the ship. They're living this thing in this moment as he's preaching this sermon. To us, it's one single verse. It's just a few words. But they're living in the moment to the point to where everything is happening. I mean, they're thrust into this moment where their ears, their minds, their thinking, everything, their heart is wide open to receive this message because of this place that God has allowed them to be in. So is it really just about Jonah? We tried it with our own hands. We tried to fix this situation. We tried to do everything we could possibly do, and nothing's working. And Jonah says, I got the answer. And they were ready to listen. The verse says they were exceedingly afraid. These people, these sailors, and I've said this numerous times, they most likely were skilled. They most likely were not rookies. They'd probably been in Joppa. They'd probably been back and forth. They probably even heard other Hebrew Israelites, Jews, talk about their one true living God. They've probably been in situations where they've had an opportunity to hear testimonies similar to this, but they had never been in this point in time, this moment. They'd never been exactly in this same place ever before. Most likely they dismissed it. Most likely they were just treated it casually. Okay, sure. So you have a God just like every other port has their God. Guess what? It just got real for them in this moment. The Creator is upset with Jonah, a Hebrew, and we're caught up in the middle of it. Pretty amazing stuff. Verse 10, the next part of it, we'll read the whole thing again. Then were the men exceedingly afraid, said unto him, Why hast thou done this? We'll just stop there for now with that part of the verse. And really a word-for-word translation might be, what this have you done? It's a rhetorical question, but again, they're upset, they're excited, fearing for their lives. I don't think that they really actually wanted an answer to that particular question. They might have just been saying, are you completely out of your mind? I'm not sure. I think they were more making a statement than asking a question, most likely. But they are seeing what is happening. They're living it out. And they're smart enough. They've been on this ship. They've been on this sea. They've probably been through similar storms, or at least something close. And now they're at a point in time where their ears have opened, their hearts and minds have opened, and Jonah's preaching and he's testifying. He's giving testimony about a God, the God of all the heavens, the God of this Hebrew man, this man that says that he serves this God, which is funny again, because remember, he's there out of rebelliousness. So this God that created all things, you're on the run from this God that created all things. Let me make sure I've got this straight, Jonah. See, I'm convinced they have a newfound respect and belief maybe in this God, and they're trying to figure out, whoa, okay, I believe who this God is in this moment because of what's going down, and you're telling me that you knew who this God was and you ran from him? You tried to disobey, to be disobedient, to be rebellious? How could anything be any more ridiculous than that? Well, you and I open up the book of Jonah and we read this today. I think we can take a few moments to give these sailors a little bit of credit here for what it is that they've kind of figured out here. Now, obviously, you kind of point the finger at Jonah and you kind of think to yourself, but be careful. Don't throw rocks when you live in a glass house, right? We are just as guilty as Jonah, because how many times have we tried to hide from God? How many times have we been disobedient or rebellious? How many times have we sinned and maybe tried to sweep it under the rug? How ridiculous. If God is God, this great creator God, the one true living God, the God of all the heavens, the God, the creator God that created the land and the sea, how can we possibly think that there's any chance of getting away with any sin, any level of disobedience or rebelliousness? Moses told the people of Israel, when you sin against the Lord, be sure your sin will find you out. Then the last part of verse 10, the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord because he told them. I don't want to go too much longer here, but This is peculiar. We don't know. These words make you believe that he's already told them at some point in time, maybe as he came on the ship. It's weird because they're asking him a lot of questions as if they don't know, but now here this verse says they did know. Well, most scholars assume that it was in verse 9 and it was just a fuller explanation than what we have recorded here. So in other words, verse 10 says they knew, but some scholars say, well, the reason they knew is because he just told them in that few seconds before this verse, not an hour or 2 hours before or whatever earlier on. That seems unlikely for a couple of reasons. It makes the whole narrative kind of awkward. Why restate the exact same thing in the very next verse that you just said in the previous verse? I mean, that can happen, but that's just a little weird. Another reason is it just kind of doesn't sync up with what we saw at the last time when we studied verse 6. The captain said, "Arise, call on your God. It may be that the God will shine on us so that we may do not perish." They made the assumption that God, the God that he was fleeing from, was just a God. But that God could petition the God. They thought nothing more of it until this, verse 9, testimony. The full revelation where he says, "I'm a Hebrew and my God is the one true living God." That seems to fit. That seems to be more reasonable of what's going on here. In ancient times, the gods of the people were assumed to be localized. Again, like I said, each port probably had their own god. If a person was fleeing, running away from their god, that would be sort of a minor thing because, well, that's the god of that port. And you can get in the boat and ride off and you're leaving him behind. He's still going to be there and you're not going to be there anymore. So in their minds, it wasn't really anything to be concerned about. When sailors would travel from port to port, they might wind up in a church service somewhere and just go along with whatever that god was in that port. And the belief was, because that God has control of that port, I want to live and have a good time while I'm at this port, so I've got to pay homage to the God of this port. So that's their mentality, the way they were thinking. And you see this throughout the Bible, people following other gods, and many oftentimes it was determined by where they were. Every time they would cross over another border into another section of land, there'd be another people group and there'd be another god. So the sailors, again, I think that they had an understanding that there was one bigger God, the God of the heavens, but so there's some awareness. So I believe that that awareness helped them understand Jonah is fleeing from that one, the God, the one big true living God. And he's been, this whole thing, him being on the ship is all about the fact that he is running away from his God. So how much did they know? How much did they understand? There's some speculation here. When did Jonah tell them? Was it the moment he got on the ship? Was it while they were taking his money, saying, okay, pay me this many dollars and you can get on board and go? I don't know that we can nail all those things down necessarily. Somewhere along the line, I believe it would have come up in conversation. Maybe not in any great detail, but I think they would have been curious about who the guy was and why he wanted to get on their ship and why he wanted to go where they were going. So most likely, I think it's easy to believe that it did come up earlier. There was some awareness, and also not just that he was a Hebrew and he worship the one true living God. But I think there was some awareness that one true living God, I don't think that they believed that he was just the God of that one port. I think that they had some understanding that he was the God, that he was the higher God of the heavens, and that whatever the little minor God was of the port, that the Hebrew God, the one true living God, was above that localized God. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I think that it's a really, really good study in verses 9 and 10 to help us get into the minds of the sailors and see what's going on in that moment, and to see how excited they were, how scared they were for their lives, and how that affected their ability to hear. Again, to me, it was a miracle that they were so kind and patient with Jonah, but they took the time to stop him, to ask him the questions, and to listen, and he gave testimony, and I'm quite sure it had an effect, a serious, long-lasting effect on their lives. I think they're ready and willing to hear the message of the gospel, and I think they got it from Jonah. Again, amazing that those are the words that came out of his mouth in that moment, because the whole thing is based on the fact that he's there in rebelliousness, in disobedience, running from God. And yet he gives testimony, and I'm confident, I believe that those sailors really heard that message. Their ears, their mind, their hearts were open to hear it in that moment. Okay, we'll stop there. We'll pick up with verse 11 next time. Let's bow and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you, we praise you, we thank you, dear Lord, for Jonah, for the story, for the writing, the ability to study your word. Dear Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to take time to look at this situation from the perspective of the sailors, and to think just a little bit about what was going on in their mind, in their lives, and how intense the situation was, and amazing how I truly believe it opened up their heart, their mind, their ears to the hearing of the gospel, the message about the one true living God. Thank you for Jonah. Thank you for this opportunity to study your word. Dear Lord, I pray for the many that are out serving. There's those Christian men and women that are traveling, that have gone out to serve communities that have had damage from storms. I pray that you would be with those men and women that are out serving, that are working to represent you and their local churches. I pray for the work that they do, that they'd be safe in their venture, in their journeyings, in their workings. Dear Lord, I pray for the people that have dealt with this devastation, that are in those situations. I pray, dear Lord, that they would be like the sailors. I pray that their heart, their mind, their ears would be ready and willing to hear the gospel, the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I pray for those moments, those opportunities, that those that are there, the moments that they have to share their testimonies. I pray that you would bless that time, bless their efforts, enable them, dear Lord, empower them as they work to serve you, as they have the opportunity to share their testimonies. Dear Lord, I pray for the work that they do, for their safety. I pray, dear Lord, for this country, for every country around the world. I pray as we come through this pandemic, dear Lord, I don't know if we've anywhere near coming through it, but I pray we are. I pray, dear Lord, if it be your will, just to heal everybody, make it go away. I pray for this nation, for our president, for all leaders, even church leaders. I pray for wisdom, dear Lord, that we might move forward in a way that's pleasing unto you. Dear Lord, I pray for police officers and those in the military as they work to serve their communities and their nation. Pray for missionaries all around the world as they work to serve you, to share the gospel. I pray that you'd bless their efforts, empower them, enable them, give them the words, dear Lord, the wisdom to speak, to know when to speak and what to share and when, and just bless that time that they have those moments so that lives will be saved. Dear Lord, I pray for Levels Baptist Church as we come to a point where we're ready to make decisions about how we move forward. And I pray, Lord, for the safety of all that come here to this campus, that they would stay well and healthy and not get sick. Lord, I pray for doctors and nurses, and so many. I pray for teachers. All of these, dear Lord, that want to do their jobs and they want to do it well. I pray that we'd continue to have this new appreciation for all of these first frontline responders, teachers, doctors, nurses. I pray, dear Lord, that we would have a new appreciation and it would carry on and continue going forward. Pray for the firefighters, for all those many out there that are fighting some raging fires. Help them, keep them safe. Help them to get those fires put out. Some rain would be great. I'm sure they'd love to see that. Lord, I just thank you for all your many, many blessings. I thank you for your great love, grace, and mercy. I thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, for his wonderful, perfect life, death, burial, and resurrection. Thank you, dear Lord, for forgiving me and saving my soul. Dear Lord, I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.